Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jonathan Foust, and welcome to this webcast. We've got an oldie but a goodie here. I'm going to be leading a short meditation and introducing this talk on cultivating your relationship to thoughts. That is to say, don't believe them, or don't believe all of them. The nature of thinking is such a fascinating topic, and I'm looking forward to diving into this one with you. As you're ready, you can, no, wait a minute. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Jonathan Faust here. Glad to have you here for this webcast. This is a good one. I think you're going to find this talk helpful. But before we do that, some announcements and a short meditation. First of all, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this and to our producer, Glenn Harrison. Thank you, thank you. A thank you to Rita Moran, our mindful movement leader. You can go to my Facebook page and website and track that link down for her class, which is just before this one, starting at 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. Also, I've got a newsletter, mostly monthly, always weekly, giving you a little update. I share my best photos from the month or the months. Oh, yes, this is all offered freely. Thank you for your support. The whole idea here is to make these practices available for anyone who is interested without any barriers to entry. Um, that's my intention, and your support is the only way I can make that happen. So thank you. And finally, we are in the countdown for the year of living mindfully, starting in September of this year. This is the 11th year I'm offering the program. It's an amazing journey. I'll leave it at that. If you're interested in a deep dive into sustaining practice, into exploring some truly transformational practices to help you become more aware, more open, more awake, check it out on my website. Those applications are due June 1st. So, one of the things you will encounter, maybe you haven't noticed this in your meditation practice, that thinking kind of dominates. How do you shift your relationship to thoughts? That's the topic. Either we are lost in thought or we are aware of the present moment. Maybe we can be in the present moment and also be aware of thoughts. That's entirely possible. But what happens is we tend to get sidetracked and believe all of our thoughts and go down some pretty crazy little rat holes in meditation and in life itself. Just that in meditation, you become more aware of the thought process. So let's explore in this following short yet brief meditation a way of working with thoughts. As you're ready, you can close your eyes. And you might notice how, with your eyes closed or with a soft gaze, you're automatically shifting your state. You are shifting from the external focus of the mind, and you are electing to turn your attention inward. And you are beginning to shift your attention toward a very interesting and I find compelling inquiry. And that is, what does it mean to be self-aware without judgment? Perhaps the most profound way to shift attention from lost in thought to the here and now is by amplifying your awareness of the senses, because the senses, the body, only lives in the here and now. So if you are aware of the next three breaths, you are guiding your attention back to this present moment. And you might sense right now, where do you feel the breath on the inside? And you may find consciously lengthening the breath a helpful way to capture your attention. So let's try just a few minutes, if you like, breathing in to the count of 4 and breathing out to the count of 4. Tracking, if it's possible, to match the length of the exhalation, exactly the length of the inhalation. This is coherent breathing. It's a way of cultivating both concentration and relaxation and invoking some interesting brainwave states, matching the length of the in breath with the length of the out breath. If you like now, we're going to shift our breathing pattern. Again, this requires concentration, which can help you to sustain attention on the here and now. We're going to move into what's known as square breathing. This is a practice of concentration that helps you to become more aware of the present moment. You're inhaling to the count of 4, holding for the count of 4, exhaling for the count of 4, and then holding out for the count of 4. And I'll count the next few rounds. Taking in a nice full inhalation, exhale fully, and now breathing in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold out, 2, 3, 4, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, hold out, 2, 3, 4, slowing it down a little bit, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold out, 2, 3, 4, continuing on your own for the next minute or so. Over the next exhalation, and let the technique fall away. And feel the imprint, feel the effect. And what do you notice? What do you feel? And as you feel your breath now unrestricted and free flowing, is it possible to maintain the awareness of the breath on the inside? And for these next few minutes, let this be your primary focus. Each time you become aware of the thought forms, each time you let go, you are reinforcing the sense of who you are as the observer. You may notice now how sensations are changing constantly, and different states are changing, and thought forms are changing constantly. And yet there is something that is aware of all that is changing. And can you imagine this backward step, sensing this quality of the observer, aware of everything that is happening, everything that is changing? From time to time, it might be helpful to refresh your sense of this breath, to re-arrive in the here and now, and then again to widen, open, and allow. When you notice the thoughts dominating, lost in a thought form, a thought bubble, noticing that you're far, far away, you might notice this and hold this as a with a quality of celebration. You're letting go, you're re-arriving, you are again awake. Feel breath, sensations, relax, receive the moment once again. There's an element of our practice which is skillful concentration, focusing on the here and now as a way of cutting through thoughts. There's another element of observing without judgment or mindfulness that separates identification from thinking. And there's yet another practice, which is simply stepping back and watching the natural flow of breath, the natural flow of sounds, and even the natural flow of thinking. In these remaining moments, you might just sense, what is it like to be deeply relaxed and at the same time alert? and at the same time allowing. And as you deepen your breath, let your body move and shift in any way that feels good for you. Beginning your transition. Welcome. The teacher, Michael Singer, once said, "You are not the thoughts inside your head. You are the one who is listening." This is a really profound observation because it points toward, well, then who are you? What is the one who's listening to this stream of 50,000 daily thoughts? One of the greatest takeaways for me in my practice, particularly when I'm on a retreat, is the recognition that I don't have to believe every thought. There's tremendous freedom in that. This following talk explores this whole topic of not believing all your thoughts and what happens when you continue to cultivate this sense of self-observation without judgment. What arises when you start to observe the thinking mind itself? I hope you find the following talk helpful, and so many blessings in your practice and everything you are called to in your life. So did something shift for you in that last 30 minutes? As one of my teachers said, if you close your eyes long enough, something will happen. I find sometimes the image of imagining myself as a mountain and being aware of the different weather systems that come and go, it can be a helpful metaphor. It helps us to realize that everything in life is constantly changing. And how we relate to what's changing will determine our level of stress and suffering. I was reflecting on how much my life has changed since I started meditating. I think I shared before that I learned meditation when I was 15, mantra meditation. And from the very first experience, I knew that this would be important, and I'd be doing it for the rest of my life. And I think one of the biggest differences for me, because I tend to be an anxious person, I tend toward anxiety and worry. I'm a little bit less anxious, or maybe even a lot less anxious. I'm a little bit less identified with my natural tendency to get caught in worry and anxiety. And I think that that's a very important part of any transformational practice, is we become less reactive and we have more of a capacity to respond. It all comes down to stimulus response. There's a stimulus and we react. Anything we can do to open up that gap between stimulus and response gives us a little more choice, a little more breathing room. So sometimes when I find myself wanting to react, there's a little bit more space where I can begin to actually see the reaction and maybe even choose how I respond. So when I first encountered sort of Buddhist meditation, I got pretty excited about it because it seemed so clear. It just seemed like this incredible path. When I first heard the four foundations of Buddhist psychology, the fact that everyone experiences stress. The second being that there's a cause for stress. It has something to do with attachment, with clinging. And the third insight, that we can actually let go. It's possible to let go of what we're holding on to. And the fourth being that there's a path. There are practices, technologies that profoundly help us to move from reaction and stress and suffering to more and more of a sense of freedom. So I became a little bit evangelical about it. Maybe you've heard this phrase that says, when I was a Buddhist, I drove everyone crazy. When I was a Buddha, no one minded at all. What happens when we begin to pay attention in meditation is we begin to see how habitual we are, how many of our reactions are just repeated over and over and over again. Have you ever had that experience of kind of being with family over the holidays and you hear the same stories told with the same inflection as they were told 15 years ago? We're creatures of habit. If you take a bunch of fruit flies and you put them in a jar with a lid on it, the fruit flies will kind of like, they'll fly around in the jar. If you take the lid off, they won't fly out of the jar. They'll stay and just go to the point of where that lid was. In that same way, we live very habitual lives. And many of our reactions are pretty predictable. And certainly with those you know intimately, you can kind of predict how they'll react. And the question becomes, how do we wake up out of that habitual way of responding to life to one that is actually free, where there's more choice, there's more creativity? And part of it has to do with exploring our relationship to thoughts and to beliefs. I remember once I was on a 2-week meditation retreat. We were in silence and pretty intensive practices. And I was walking from the meditation hall back to my room. I was thinking about something that I had to do when I got back home. And I noticed my mind just said, this is going to be a really long slog. Just an anticipation of what I was going to do. And then a little light bulb came on. And I just thought, do I really believe that? Like, do I really believe it's going to be a long, hard slog? And I actually just sort of stopped and I sort of examined that belief. Here was this belief sort of locked in there that this event was going to be hard. And I just sort of hung out with that belief, and I just thought, what if it's not true? What if it could actually be really fun and easy? And I experienced a real softening of tension. Not the skies didn't open, but I just felt a sense of ease, a sense of freedom from that belief that this was going to be hard. As I continued with that in my meditation practice, I started to notice more and more how many beliefs were just popping up, how many habitual thoughts I had, and I started just questioning every one of these beliefs. And while it was a little bit ungrounding, perhaps, it was also really freeing. So I began to see just how much my thoughts were creating my life and creating my world. We, of course, rely on our thoughts all the time, and they can serve us quite beautifully. The thinking mind, the linear rational mind, performs 3 basic functions. It compares, and it judges, and it tries to figure things out. Most of us here are probably paid good money to do that. It allows us to do business together, to drive cars together. at the same time. So the linear rational mind serves a very, very important purpose. There's something beyond the linear rational mind, though, which we could call the intuitive mind. In Buddhist psychology, we call it the Buddhi mind, which is sort of sensing the unconditioned mind, which is oftentimes available to us when we feel a sense of the mystery, when we feel a profound sense of love, when we're just deeply, deeply engaged into something, whether it be an intimate moment or in sports or a task, when you're in that state of flow. The linear rational mind is suspended, and yet there's something that's very alive in our consciousness. So we're perhaps more than the mind, more than just the linear rational mind. Part of this training is how do we open into those fields to explore really what it means to be fully alive and fully human. There's a term in Pali, in the language of the Buddha, called papancha. And papancha refers to the proliferation of thoughts. And so much of the time, of course, we have one thought. That thought triggers another thought, which triggers another thought. And we're just on kind of a chain of endless thinking, of one thought setting up the next thought. And of course, we get to see that in intimate detail when we practice meditation. We just begin to see how the mind just kind of keeps on thinking and just sort of randomly connecting one thought to the other. Sometimes magically we wake up and we realize, wow, I've just been on a thought train for the last 20 minutes. And then we can pause and we do this very, very important thing where we shift from the narrative or our story to the experience and to the here and now. There's another term in Pali that's called nipapancha, which is non-proliferation. And in some ways that can describe some of these meditative states where you hear the car go by and you don't add a story to it. It's just sensation arising and sensation passing away. So in those states, through cultivating concentration and paying attention, we can actually kind of stop the proliferation and stay directly with the experience. Oftentimes I've talked about this sort of chain of causality, that there's this pure raw sensation. And that raw sensation is interpreted by the mind as a felt sense, as either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. From there, the mind begins a story. I like this, I don't like this. And if the mind goes unchecked, it will continue to think thoughts. And if you think the same thought over and over and over again, it calcifies into a belief. And if the belief goes unchecked, it becomes a habit. It informs your activity. If the habit goes unchecked, it becomes part of your character. And if your character goes unchecked, that becomes your destiny. So in this chain of causality, much of the practice is about guiding your attention to the very first foundation, to the direct experience of sensation in the body. And we notice the mind beginning to proliferate. We can very gently escort it back. And when we do that, every time we can bring the mind back, you're just a little bit less identified with the thinking mind. There might be just a little bit more space, a little bit more freedom. So thoughts, of course, are quite interesting. We experience about 50,000 thoughts a day. Just kind of an endless stream. And of course, most of those are not originals. They're just sort of reruns from yesterday and the day before. And thoughts are generally associated either with the past or with the future. And I kind of noticed for myself, being more kind of anxiety driven, that I would have a lot of thoughts of the future, a lot of anticipation of the future. I'm probably the only one here who does this, but. And I began to notice how my anticipation of the future was not very reliable. Either I would think it's going to be great, and it maybe wouldn't be that great, or it's going to be terrible, and it really wouldn't be that bad. The more we begin to really see our thoughts, the more we begin to realize how little bearing they actually have on reality. So what mindfulness does, this practice of cultivating non-judging awareness, is it helps you to connect more deeply with what's actually here. So in meditation, oftentimes the instruction is that when you lose your concentration on the anchor, whether it be breath or sound or sensation, you bring it right back. But it can be interesting from time to time to kind of explore what it's like when you're lost in thought. Just to kind of get to know what it's like when you're in that dreamy place of fantasy or planning. Or to really get to know what it's like when you're in some form of aversion or judgment or blame. Or to get more intimately acquainted with that state of restless worry and anxiety. Or to notice when the thoughts kind of go toward numbing. Or when, of course, you find the mind caught in doubt and self-criticism. Was that sense of being the mountain and watching the weather systems that pass by. We begin to see and identify the nature of those weather systems. That generally what's between you and feeling present will be one of those 5 states. Thoughts that have to do with aversion, of anger, judgment, and blame. Thoughts that have to do with wanting, with planning, with fantasy. The category of thoughts that have to do with worry and anxiety and restlessness. The thoughts that have to do with sort of disassociation, with numbing. And the thoughts that are associated with doubt and self-criticism. So there are other modalities of perceiving other than just the thinking mind. And it's possible to use the thinking mind, but perhaps not to rely on it so exclusively. And I'd like to talk a little bit about these. And then to talk about some strategies of how we can actually work with the thinking mind, particularly when it feels like it's out of control. I was in the Peace Corps in West Africa and many years ago, and I taught in a university. And I remember once one of my colleagues was kind of caught in his car and was taking off. I was just hopping on my motorcycle, and I thought, oh no, I missed him. I want to see him. And suddenly, I had this icy feeling in my chest. And this thought occurred to me, where I said, well, I'll catch up with him on the bridge. Something terrible has happened. I had no idea what that might have been. But as I kind of got on my motorcycle and headed toward the one bridge that crossed the Niger River, all the traffic was backed up. And there was a young boy who had been struck by a truck. I was really struck by how did that information land in my system? It certainly didn't come through the linear rational mind. I first felt it as kind of an icy feeling in my chest. And there's this perception that something bad had happened, and for some reason I had associated it with the bridge. The sense of intuitive perception that's beyond the linear rational mind is something I find really quite fascinating. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink, he talks in great detail of just how much information the mind can process in the blink of an eye. And usually your very first impression is ridiculously accurate. We know more and more about what's called the enteric nervous system. The enteric nervous system is the gut. And just how much we can perceive through the gut. And my understanding is Japan, when they say someone has got a really good sense, they touch their gut, they touch the belly. He's got good hara, got a good feel for things. Buddhism speaks of 4 foundations of awareness. This first foundation being the experience of direct sensation, kind of direct, unadulterated sensation. The second foundation is called Vedana, or that felt sense, where instantly you perceive something as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then you immediately begin to strategize. If it's unpleasant, how do you nuke it or neutralize it? If it's pleasant, how do you get more of it? And if it's neutral, you're going to get bored and you want to find something pleasant, or even something unpleasant is oftentimes better than neutral. Out of that reaction from this felt sense of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, the mind, of course, kicks in. I don't like this, I never like this, I don't want this, I'm going to make sure this never happens again. We're locked into reaction. This feels really, really good. How can I get more of it? How can I make sure this isn't taken away from me? Instantly. It just happens without us knowing it. The fourth foundation has to do with what are called the Dhammas, which are, like, in all of this, what is true? And in Buddhist psychology, there's this recognition of the 4 noble truths, of the 5 hindrances, or the 5 states, and on, these different distinctions about kind of the nature of reality and how we can more skillfully relate to what's actually true in our lives. So we can begin to recognize that we're multidimensional beings. We're not just thinking beings. We're feeling beings as well. And the question becomes, how do we work with all of this? How do we find our way in a way that's skillful, that moves us from stress to freedom? I was once leading a 21-day meditation retreat. This is many, many years ago. And I think we had about 3 days to go in the retreat. I was sitting in the front of the room where it was a 45-minute meditation. And we were maybe about 2/3 of the way through the meditation. And I am not making this up. I had a very clear, distinct thought. It was a pretty quiet mind by then. And the thought went like this. When I get home on Sunday, I'm going to cook my husband a really wonderful meal so that he'll sit and listen to me while I tell him what happened to me while I was here. And I actually opened my eyes. And I looked around because I thought maybe someone had whispered it and I had heard it. All I could do was close my eyes again, because I was meditating, and I realized quite distinctly that was not my thought. I just thought someone else's thought. But then I started freaking out a little bit, because then I started wondering how many of the thoughts I'm thinking are actually mine. Jack Kornfield says the best thing about meditating in a group is if you're having particularly insane thoughts, you can blame them on the person behind you. So how do we separate ourselves from the habitual mind? How do we work with the mind? And I wanted to name just a couple strategies. I think it's wonderfully summarized in this short poem. It's called Autobiography in 5 short chapters. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. It kind of says it all. One thing I so love about the Buddha's teachings is that the Buddha repeatedly said, don't believe a word of what I'm telling you. You have to find out through your own direct experience. He also said part of life and part of engaging in the spiritual practice is to give yourself fully to a practice, give yourself fully to a discipline, and then ruthlessly evaluate whether it's helpful or not. And if it is, to continue, and if it's not, to evaluate and move on. We all fall into these holes all the time. Mindfulness, or non-judging awareness, can be a wonderful tool for beginning to recognize not only the fact that we've fallen in a hole, but to realize that there may be other options. So, a few strategies for how to work with the mind. Einstein once said that no problem was ever solved in the same consciousness that created it. So anytime you find yourself caught in a rut, a hole, the only way you can begin to perceive a solution is if you shift your consciousness in some way. So you're recognizing it from a different elevation. So the first strategy is to change your state, to shift the awareness of the mind. There's a wonderful story of John D. Rockefeller when he had an important decision to make in life. He would go to the club and he would golf around, and then he would go to his room and he would take a nap. And at the end of the nap, he would have his solution. That was kind of his ritual. That was the way that he was able to change his state of mind, engaging into activity, conscious rest, etc. So looking for strategic ways that support you in shifting your state can be enormously helpful, particularly if you find yourself caught in sort of cycling into a depressive state. There are studies upon studies upon studies that are demonstrating that exercise is one of the most powerful things you can do. There are quite a few psychologists and psychiatrists that I know who will not work with someone unless they're engaged into some physical fitness. That's just a very grounded, very practical way of how you can change your relationship to your mind by shifting your state. To be aware of exercise, diet, getting enough rest, etc. Very fundamental, but tremendously powerful. Another strategy for working with thoughts is to focus on your intention, to remember what your purpose is. Oftentimes when we're caught in reaction, we're on some hamster wheel of circular thinking. When you can pause and ask yourself, what is the most important thing? Either recognizing that intention or declaring what is most important can be a very powerful way of shifting out of a cycle of circular thought and to redirect your attention again. Third strategy, which the Buddha talked about, is to incline your mind toward positive states. It was described, the translation is gladdening the mind. I have a good friend who teaches a lot about gladdening the mind. And he begins every meditation with a reflection on everyone who's been kind to him in his life. So it takes him maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Either he goes through them very, very quickly or not that many people were kind to him. But just reflecting on what you feel grateful for. And who's been unexpectedly kind toward you. It will begin to shift your consciousness. Wherever the attention goes, the energy flows. As I described before, I have ridden motorcycles most of my life, and I've read lots of books on how not to die riding motorcycles. And the classic example is when you're trained to go through tight curves, either on a motorcycle or a car, that when you enter into the curve, you keep your eyes fixated on the exit of the curve. And just by holding your attention on the exit of the curve, your chances of following the trajectory are much, much higher. It's when you begin to lose control and you see the tree and start fixating on the tree, you'll go right into the tree. So reflecting on what you feel grateful for, of what gladdens the heart, tremendously powerful. How that can not only shift your thoughts, but it also changes your physiology. We know now from functional MRIs that directing the mind toward things which are gladdening, things which are connecting, light up different parts of the brain. The next strategy is to reflect on compassion or empathy, particularly when there are thoughts where you find yourself in conflict with another. If you can do a role reversal to really deeply and sincerely try to imagine or feel what the other person is experiencing, when you can do that with some sincerity, your relationship to your thoughts will shift because you moved from a separate self to an awareness of the other, to see the self in other and the other in self. And the fifth strategy is to be aware of awareness. We kind of started off our evening exploring the sense of how mindfulness is non-judging awareness or non-judging presence. And that is what we're practicing. We're practicing self-observation without judgment. Simply by being aware of what's there can create a very profound shift. Just to be able to see it and name it and recognize it. So then the question really becomes, well, what are we if we're not just our thoughts? What exactly are you? What happens when the thoughts are no longer predominating? It's a wonderful, just 2 lines written by a Japanese poet. It's called meditation on the mountain. The birds have vanished down the sky. Now the last cloud drains away. We sit together, the mountain and me, until only the mountain remains. So perhaps we can do a little reflection on this. If you like, you can close your eyes. You might draw your attention to the movement of the breath inside, just noticing where you feel the breath the most predominant. And if you like, you might just feel what it's like to open the sense doors. Can you feel the vibration of all the sounds around you? Can you register the temperature, the texture of the air against your skin? Feeling the points of pressure between your body and the chair or the cushion. Internally, you might just sense the perception of any warmth or coolness. Can you perceive any tingling or awareness of pulse or vibration inside? You might sense just the perception of taste and smell, perception of light beyond your closed eyes. And you might just sense the brain, which in Buddhist psychology is referred to as a sense organ, as it is intimately connected to all these senses. Just sensing the brain as this computer that is interpreting, making sense of this raw data of sensation. Can you detect here this movement of sensation into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral? Can you sense in some way how thoughts arise out of your reaction to this experience in the body? And can you sense who you are as the observer of all this phenomena arising and changing? One metaphor of this practice is to sense the mountain and the weather systems that pass through. Another metaphor, as described in this poem by Rumi, is how meditation is like running a B&B with different visitors. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. This mind, which is so consumed with past and future, in these final moments, sensing who you are as the observer of everything that can change. We'll close with these words from the Buddha. The secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, not to worry about the future, not to anticipate the future, but to live in the present moment, wisely and earnestly. As you're ready, gently deepening the breath. And when you're ready, you can let the eyes open. Thank you for your kind attention. May you and your thoughts have a wonderful evening together and beyond. A couple of quick announcements. We'll keep you abreast of the parking lot issues. Right now it looks like we kind of have a green light for at least another couple of weeks. So, and again, if you feel inspired to make a contribution to the construction fund, that would be great. If you'd like to be on the mailing list, you can sign up in the back, and I'll make sure you're on that. And as always, just thank you for your generosity that supports this class and supports the church and IMCW and myself. I'll just close with one last thing. You may have heard this one. René Descartes, his whole relationship to the mind. I think, therefore I am. You may have heard that at the very end of his life, he went into a bar. He had a beer, and the bartender said, "Would you like another?" And he said, "I think not," and he disappeared. So on that note, have a great night.